everyone. We'll get things underway. We're all here for the 1988 Associated Press Broadcasters Association debate between the 6 candidates running for Vermont's lone seat in the United States House of Representatives. First, our candidates, going from left to right, and I ask that because time is precious this evening, you please withhold applause until all the candidates have been introduced. First, we have Peter Diamondstone, the Liberty Union Party candidate from Brattleboro. Morris Earle, small Is Beautiful Party candidate from New Haven. James Hedbor, the Libertarian Party candidate from South Hero. Paul Poirier, Democratic Party candidate from Barrie. Bernard Sanders, Independent Party candidate from Burlington. And Peter Smith, Republican Party candidate from Middlesex. Our broadcast journalist panel members this evening, from WCAX-TV in Burlington, to my left, Will Michael. From WPTZ-TV in Burlington-Plattsburgh, Karen Conway in the middle. And from radio station WCVR in Randolph, John Moyers. And you don't have to applaud. It's okay. And now the rules. Engineering this evening, by the way, we have Bob Kinsel from Vermont News Service. And thank you, Bob, for filling in short notice. This debate will have 2 segments. In part 1, our panelists will ask the candidates questions about foreign and domestic policy. Their choice. The candidates will be allowed 1.5 minutes to respond. Then during part 2 of tonight's debate, and I'll explain this again later, the candidates will have the opportunity to ask the other candidates questions and to offer a rebuttal. The questions can be no longer than 30 seconds, either by our panelists or by the candidates later. The response is 90 seconds, and the rebuttals in part 2 tonight will be 60 seconds. And again, don't worry, I'll repeat those rules again before we begin part 2. Again, time is very tight, and because there are so many candidates, we respectfully ask that all applause be withheld until we are done this evening, and I thank you in advance. Now to part 1. The candidates will be questioned by the panelists in an order that was just predetermined. Ms. Sars, do it. Karen and Will Michael will start tonight with a question for independent candidate Bernard Sanders, Mayor of Burlington. Will?
Thank you, Brian. Mayor, could you please tell us, I'd like to read you a sentence, if I could, and ask you to fill in the blanks here. If you went to multiple choice, if you went to Washington tomorrow, the first thing that you'd like to work on is blank, because blank.
The first thing that I would like to address as Congressman from Vermont is the grossly unfair distribution of wealth and power in this country. During the last 8 years, the richest people have become increasingly richer, the poorest have become poorer, and the middle class is being squeezed extremely hard. I think that the fact that so few people in this country have so much wealth and so much power is not only unfair, but it is dangerous for democracy, because that wealth translates into political power, it translates into ownership of the media, it translates into ownership of the economy. I believe in democracy, and that means that all people have got to have a fair shake, and that's not what's going on right now. So that is the issue that I would like to tackle most strongly if elected to Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And now Karen Conway with a question for Republican candidate Peter Smith of Middlesex.
Hi, Peter. I'd like you to talk a little bit about AIDS. It's widely believed that the Reagan administration delayed research efforts on AIDS in the early years because the disease wasn't taken so seriously, because it mostly affected gays and drug users. Do you think the Reagan administration would have placed a different value on the disease and the research efforts if perhaps the disease affected mostly middle-aged women?
I think what's important about AIDS research and the AIDS effort over the last couple of years is, in fact, the Congress and the administration have woken up and done something about it. Frankly, the second commission that's been put together, reconstituted, has, I think, outperformed everybody's expectations, including the skeptics. And what they've said are a couple of things that clearly over the next 4 to 8 years we're going to have to deal with, both in terms of people who abuse drugs, people who contract AIDS in other ways. First of all, they've said they know that the test we have is not reliable enough to really stand muster. We need a lot more research, not only on how to identify the disease, but a great deal more research in terms of how to prevent it and how to cure it, hopefully at some point. Secondly, I feel, as sure as I sit here, that over the next 4 to 6 years, we're going to have to go farther than the McKinney bill, which has been Congress's best effort to date, in terms of creating a federal presence to aid victims of AIDS. The McKinney bill, as you know, is for homeless people and deals with, is sort of, I think, symptomatic of the Congress finally coming to grips with this problem a little bit.
For Democratic candidate Paul Poirier.
Good evening. Mr. Poirier, this summer the Central Vermont Community Action Council surveyed 253 Vermonters and found that a large majority of them had trouble putting food on the table after paying their rent. What can be done on the federal level to help families like that here in Vermont?
I think the first thing we have to recognize is that at the federal level, you cannot have a federal government or an administration saying that we have a surplus of milk, and therefore they cut the prices, and then at the same time turn around and say we have a shortage now, and therefore we're going to cut out the commodities programs. I think what's happened in Washington is that there have been some interpretations of figures and interpretations of data to try and play both sides. It's very clear that in this country we have to recognize that the United States government has a major moral responsibility to make sure that government serves the needs that can't take care of themselves. And we have made a commitment in this country to produce cheap food, and at the same time we ought to continue that commitment and honor it and not play both sides again, to try and balance the budget by saying we have a surplus, and in reality then telling the people at the low income there is a shortage of food, so therefore cut out the commodities program. It has to be consistent, and if I was in Washington, I would make sure that we keep those commitments and we tell the American people the truth.
Now Will Michael with a question for Libertarian Party candidate James Hedbor.
Mr. Hedbor, one of yesterday's top stories in the news dealt with welfare reform. For the first time in 20 years, there were reforms to that program, including a work provision. Is that a provision that you support? And if so, do you think the reform goes far enough?
It is a proposal, it is a reform that I do support, first of all, and it doesn't go far enough. We still have a situation where after 20 years of the war on poverty, we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on poverty, and we have as many poor people as ever. What we have to do is we have to find ways to help people get out of poverty. The main answer to poverty is decent jobs. And the place that good jobs should come from is from adequate capital available to create jobs. And some of the laws that prevent jobs from being created being removed from the books. We have much too much licensing laws that eliminate entry-level jobs. You can't become a dog groomer or a taxi driver in a lot of places without paying for a large license fee. We need to have a lot more saving on the part of Americans and a lot more investment on the part of Americans, because this is where really good jobs come from and not from government borrowing and government spending. On the welfare programs, we need to have ways that are different from what we have today. Today, in some cases, welfare recipients have cash and benefits equal to as much as $15,000, $16,000 a year for some AFDC mothers. If they go and get a job, the typical job they get is an $8,000 job, and all the benefits are gone immediately. So we have to find a way to grade the benefits, and that's what was done somewhat in this new bill. It's a good thing. And we need to do more of that so that people can climb out of the poverty trap that we've unintentionally created in the last 20 years.
Karen Conway with a question for Small Is Beautiful Party candidate Morris Earle.
Hello, Morris. I'd like you to tell us how you feel about the often repeated theme, politics as usual, especially for someone like you who's well outside the Democrat and Republican Party. Why do you think you would be more than just another congressman in Washington?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be indebted to anybody when I went down there. I mean, when you're in a big party, everybody has a piece of you by the time you get to Washington. They want to influence you. you want to please them, and they whittle away at you. Well, that doesn't happen in my case. I think the number of people who want a piece of me is rather low. Thank you.
It's time for a follow-up. Go ahead, Karen.
What do you have to offer then?
Well, I have to offer a program covering all the different areas of economic and social need and want in these things like food, energy and fuel, shelter, clothing. I've got a small is beautiful approach to all of these subjects that, in my opinion, will improve the happiness and the physical condition of all of us.
We'd like to hear about this sometime.
Thank you, Mr. Earle. John Moyers with a question for Liberty Union Party candidate, Peter Diamondstone.
Mr. Diamondstone, we have 3 candidates on the panel tonight who might be considered outside the establishment. 4, perhaps. How does a legislator... I know you don't like that Mr. Sanders, I'm sorry, but... How does a legislator from outside the establishment make his presence or her presence felt in Washington?
First of all, anybody who enters the electoral process is not outside the establishment. Let's understand that from the beginning. This is a very establishment system that all 6 of us have entered from the beginning, very structured and very clearly set up, that money buys your way through a whole series of establishment kinds of things happen in this. Nobody up here is outside the establishment. If elected to Congress, I sit in a kind of interesting place with respect to the other candidates. I neither belong to the Democrat caucus nor the Republican caucus, nor do I need to participate in either the Democrat or Republican caucus. Since I represent a political party, I'm entitled to participate in every committee, or my party is entitled to participate in every committee of the United States House. And I believe that that gives me an advantage, putting me in an equal plane with Democrats and Republicans. I don't think anybody who sits in the United States Congress is outside the system, and I don't think anybody who participates in this process is outside the system.
Time for a follow-up?
Sure. Another 30 seconds.
Well, I hope you didn't mean me to say outside the system, because it was more outside the established 2 parties. Excuse me.
I meant to say that anybody who participates in this process is within the establishment. This is an establishment procedure controlled just like big business.
Second go-round of questions for the candidates. We'll change the panelist order, but not the answering order. Karen Conway now with a question for independent candidate Bernard Sanders.
Mayor, if you would assess this argument that drugs should be legalized or at least decriminalized, so we know who's dealing and the price will fall, eliminating much of domestic drug crime, and so that their sale, the money from their sale can be taxed to fund treatment centers, which most people agree are desperately needed.
Okay. It basically is what my view is on the legalization of drugs. Is that, in a nutshell, what the question is, Karen? Okay.
Your view on that argument.
Okay. I think, given the fact that the policies presently being pursued have not succeeded, the concept of the legalization of drugs is a reasonable concept to bring forward for debating purposes. I don't support it at the present time, and I'll tell you why I don't support it. It goes without saying that today hundreds of thousands of young people are having their minds and their bodies severely harmed by drug addiction. And this is mostly true, although certainly not only true, but significantly true in ghettos throughout America among poor people. To legalize drugs would be to say to that segment of our population that we as Americans, as society, have given up on you, and that it's perfectly okay for you to get high, for you to get strung out, for you to be separate from productive society. That's okay. You can get your drugs pretty cheap, and it reminds me very much as to what the British did to the Chinese. in China when they ran that country. It was fine that you had millions of Chinese strung out on opium. Nobody really cared, and it was to the advantage of the British. So I would recognize that right now this country is doing a horrendous job in terms of fighting drugs among young people. And the main reason is, and I have to say it's a reason that people like Jesse Jackson have been talking about, is that millions of people, millions of young people, regardless of their age, have given up on the system. They look forward, they look at the years in front of them, and they don't see productive years, they don't see happy years, meaningful years, decent jobs, decent educational opportunity. Providing those aspects of life is what's going to beat the drug problem.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. John Moyers with a question for Republican candidate Peter Smith.
In light of the deficit, which is so much on people's mind, taxes are also on the minds of candidates this year. One presidential nominee says he absolutely will not raise taxes. The other says it would only be a last resort. Do you feel new taxes must be a part of an element of overall deficit reduction, and what role should taxes play in that?
No, John, I don't think that tax increase can be or should be a part of the deficit reduction package, and let me tell you why. Next year, if the economy continues to expand at the rate that it is, we will generate 70 to 80 billion more dollars standing still for the Congress to spend and the President to propose the spending, whomever that President is in the Congress to spend. Now, I don't know about Randolph, but where I live in Middlesex, $80 billion is pretty much money, and that's an average estimate from the Congressional Budget Office and some other sources, maybe off by a little. But I frankly think that the real challenge that faces us is, first of all, to meet the Graham-Rudman targets, two, to pay the uncontrollable costs, the commitments that we have in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest payments, and so on. Then to look at what we've got left. And before we do the easy thing, which is go into people's pockets, which we would do to pay for new programs, frankly, and I think that's the excuse, is we're going to do it to balance the budget, but it's really going to be for new programs. I think, frankly, we ought to look at the kinds of reforms inside the system that will free up professionals at the local level to do the job that's in front of them. I'll give you one example. Home health services in Vermont currently pay an administrative overhead of 35 cents on the dollar. Why? Because they're operating under a tremendous bureaucratic load, and what we need to do is cut that load and turn that time and that money and that energy into service to clients who need it desperately in an area where we all want services delivered to people who are at home and ill. We can make tremendous changes inside the system, and I think we owe the taxpayers of this country all of that before we go back to them, and I don't think we have to.
Will Michael with a question for Democratic candidate Paul Poirier.
Paul, the stories of graduating high school students who cannot read or write are well documented. Is there a role for the federal government in improving the quality of education, and if so, what is it?
Well, as you know, many people know, I'm a teacher by choice. I'm proud to be a teacher for the last 18 years. We have to recognize that in the United States of America, there are millions of people who are illiterate. These are people who cannot go out and find a job because many of them can't even fill out the job application. What's happened in many parts of this world, and we can be very proud of what we've done here in Vermont, the state legislature, which I'm proud to say I was part of that leadership. We had programs to reach out, to keep kids in school, to make special money available. What the federal government has been doing at the national level is cutting back its commitment on education. It made a decision that education and educational concerns are a state level, and the federal government has taken that money and put it into this tremendous infusion of money into the military. What I'm saying is, what good is a military infusion of money if the people that are going to go in the military can't read and write? The federal government has to recognize that we have to identify very early, even preschool testing, to identify students that have reading disabilities, learning disabilities, and try and get them help immediately. Once children get into the network of education, we spend millions of dollars, but we're fighting a losing battle. We need early identification to deal with it, and that's got to become a priority of the federal government if we're going to meet our national commitments in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier. A question for Libertarian Party candidate from Karen Conway.
Mr. Hedbor, I'd like to ask you the same question I asked Mayor Sanders. What's wrong with legalizing drugs, or at least decriminalizing drugs, if it's going to reduce domestic crime?
I've spent all day today writing my position paper on the eventual legalization of drugs and on the war on rights, which is going on right now and which we are probably going to be involved in during the next 5, 10, 15 years until we turn around. And I'll hold a press conference on this tomorrow. In summary, 7 out of 10 Vermonters right now believe that we should intensify our efforts to crack down on drugs. 1 out of 10 Vermonters right now thinks that legalization of drugs is an option. Because of this, I have to pledge in this term of Congress that I would follow the opinion of Vermonters and not propose legislation to legalize drugs at this time. There'd be no point to doing it because the American people aren't ready for this yet. In 1920, Prohibition was passed, and it was passed by a huge majority. In fact, the President vetoed the bill which made Prohibition the law, and the veto was overridden. 13 years later, after a tremendous increase of gangsterism, as much alcohol as ever before, and every kind of destruction of the American social fabric, Prohibition was ended. Now, what we have going on right now is a war against rights. We're seeing proposals to search without warrants. We're seeing property seized before people have to go to court to prove that they're innocent in order to get their property back. We're seeing every article in the Bill of Rights is being challenged in this war on drugs. And in Congress, what I will do is I will stand up for the Constitution and for the Bill of Rights during this period of time that it appears to me we have to go through before we are prepared to face the music and legalize drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Debor. John Moyers with a question for Morris Earle, Small is Beautiful candidate.
Good evening. I'm willing to bet, Mr. Earle, that there are a number of Vermonters out there unfamiliar with the Small is Beautiful party and its platform. I wonder if you could elucidate perhaps the main tenet of your party.
Well, thank you. Yes, well, first of all, it's not a party. It's a movement. Under Vermont's wonderful law, an independent, once he gets on the ballot, can take a label. And this is the label that I've taken. And in this movement, there are quite a few people who are helping me. We're for, we say small is beautiful. We say small enterprise is beautiful. Small farms are beautiful. Self-employment is beautiful. We say that this way, through the small way, we can have happy lives to replace the frustrated lives that so many people experience and are growing up to. Thank you.
Can you do a follow-up, John? No. Okay. Finally, Will Michael with a question for Liberty Union candidate Peter Diamondstone.
Peter, as I'm sure you're aware, there have been a great number of calls for tort reform and other reforms of our legal system. Do you think there should be reforms of our legal system, and if so, what path should they follow?
Well, first of all, 95% of all legal services are consumed by 5% of the population, much like the income distribution of our society. I think it's absolutely essential, particularly in criminal cases, that nobody have choice of counsel, and that all counsel be assigned and be part of a public defender system. We see the Von Bulow trial drag on for months and months and months because they have the money to pay for the lawyers to make it drag on. And we see people in Vermont convicted on charges of murder within 2 or 3 and even 5 days. You see the same sort of patterns in jury selection. A half an hour for people who don't pay and many hours and many days for Zaccaros. That's one kind of reform that's necessary. Another kind of reform that's absolutely necessary is to have more judges like side judges and stop the intrusion on side judge authority, and to elect the judges that we already, to the positions that we already have. And those people who are eligible for that should not necessarily be lawyers. judging issues of criminality, judging issues of fairness of contract, doesn't require a hell of a lot of expertise. It requires a lot of good common sense. And I would like to see the judiciary opened up to public election for that office. Another reform that I would like to see is making appeals easier. We now have a system where...
It's time, Peter. Thank you. With some trepidation, it appears we have time for one more complete round, and I think we ought to do it. We didn't hit much foreign policy at all. So we'll start. The panelist this time is John Moyers, and the first question is for independent candidate Bernard Sanders.
Mr. Sanders, third world debt is estimated to be roughly $420 billion, much of that owed to financial institutions of the United States. Failure on that debt could bring down not only our economy, but the world economy. What can the U.S. do to help third world countries get a handle on that debt?
Well, as you know, the cause of the debt is that huge banks in the United States, which do not have the capital available to provide funding for affordable housing in the United States, which do not have the funding available to help Americans develop decent jobs, understood that they had the opportunity of making tremendous sums of money by lending huge amounts to undeveloped countries at very, very high interest rates. And what's going on in the world, as the price of commodities fail, these countries are unable to pay back the debt. And then what the large international financial groups are doing is telling these countries to cut back on programs for their people, to lower the amount of food that their people receive, that their workers earn in income, squeeze them as hard as they can so they can pay back their debts to the huge banks. And I think what you're seeing now is a disastrous policy on the part of the huge banks. I think what has got to happen is the United States government, led by the Congress, has got to bring the underdeveloped countries together with the banks and work out a sensible payback program which will not include all of the money. There's no question, you can't get it. Furthermore, we've got to develop economic programs with the third world which will stimulate their country, not drain their countries, so that in fact they can begin to have the wealth to make some paybacks.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Will Michael with the question for Republican Peter Smith.
Peter, President Reagan today vetoed a textile bill saying that the bill represents protectionism at its worst. Supporters claim that bill would protect a sagging American industry from foreign competition. As a representative, would you support such protectionist legislation?
In fact, I would, having not read the bill, quite frankly, Will, I would have to read it first. But my instinct, frankly, is to be for largely open and unrestricted trade. And let me tell you why. There was a time when this country retreated from the world. It was in the 1920s, and we did it under the guise of several things, but primary amongst them the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which threw up the walls. And what the people of this country said was it doesn't matter whether this country is involved in terms of foreign affairs, in terms of trade, in terms of defense in the world. What we got, in part, from that single action were three things. One, the worst global depression in the history of mankind. Two, as a result of that global dislocation, one of the most extraordinary rises in tyranny in the history of mankind, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito. And going out, we got clearly to date the worst war in the history of mankind. So to people who say maybe we need to be involved in the world a little differently, I say yes, because times have changed, and I'm not for a minute saying that those would be the consequences today. But our trade policy has to seek a rising economic tide for all people and all nations if, in fact, we want global peace. It is foreign policy, and people that say that trade policy isn't foreign policy or a critical part of our defensive strategy really miss the point, the fundamental economic point that we've made with the Peace Corps and other programs for 25 years, that it's our right hand in trade and in fellowship that makes a difference with people around this world.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. John Moyers with a question for Democratic candidate Paul Poirier.
Mr. Poirier, should the U.S. officially condemn Israel's use of confrontation and violence rather than negotiation in the occupied territories of Gaza and the West Bank? And how should we help to remedy that situation if we should be involved at all?
I think more than any candidate running for this office, I have the clearest position on the Middle East. I have said consistently in this position that the United States should speak out consistently all over the world. It's easy to sit back and criticize what's happening in certain parts of the world, but people turn a deaf ear to the Middle East. I have said consistently that we have to stand up and proclaim that we believe in a strong, free Israel. We have to look at arms sales in the Middle East and how they affect our commitment to Israel, but at the same time, we cannot be afraid to turn around and say to the Israeli government that what you're doing to the Palestinian people is a mistreatment of their human rights. As far as the role of the United States should do everything it can in its power to bring the Israelis into face-to-face negotiations with representatives of the Palestinian and let them work out a settlement as Egypt and Israel did, and the United States should not be part of trying to mandate any settlement on any party unless the parties directly involved can sit down face-to-face and talk.
Do you support a Palestinian homeland?
I have clearly stated from the beginning I believe in self-determination of the Palestinian people, the same way as I believe in self-determination for people all over the world.
Karen Conway with a question for Mr. Hedbor.
Please tell us, if you would, how important it is for you to reduce the trade deficit and the budget deficit, but please don't blame anyone in your answer.
Gosh. I have a money-back guarantee that's part of my campaign. It says I will never vote for an unbalanced budget. I think that the unbalanced budgets and the enormous deficits that we have built over the last 10 years, over the last 30 years, we've increased the national debt 10 times over since I got my first job 30 years ago. Now, we just can't keep it going on like this. You can't separate the trade deficit from the national debt, because the national debt weakens the American economy in such a way that it harms the American currency and the American economy in relation to other economies around the world. I'm not going to pretend to be able to get into that in a minute and a half, but there's an economic relationship there which is direct. I think what we have to do in the next Congress is we have to have some congressman like myself who will stand up and insist on a balanced budget right away. I don't expect to carry it in 1989. I think 10, 20, or 30 will join me. But I think we'll send the other 400 home, and they'll have to explain in the next election why they did not insist on a balanced budget. And I think that a movement has to come up from the people in the United States in order to balance the budget, because the politicians will never do it. They'll come up with phony deals like Graham-Rudman that allow them to pretend they're going to balance it 5 years from now. The people have to speak, and it has to start with someone in Congress saying, let's balance it right now, and that's what I will do.
Thank you. Will Michael with a question for Small Is Beautiful Party candidate Morris Earle.
Morris, one of President Reagan's most controversial foreign policy plans has been support of the rebel fighters in Nicaragua. Do you support the president's agenda in Central America?
No.
If not, then what do you think American policy there ought to be?
Well, I don't support it. What I really think American policy should be is to say, well, all right, we're going to control the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, and we don't want Russia or Cuba sending any materiel or any troops into Nicaragua. At the same time, we're going to get out, and we're going to leave it to the people down there to decide their own destiny. So, one, I'm very strongly against the president's policy of egging the Contras on all the time. But two, I do believe that we should have the determination to control those bodies of water and to tell the Iron Curtain countries to stay out.
Thank you, Mr. Earle. And finally, Karen with a question for Peter Diamondstone, Liberty Union.
What would be your policy in terms of hostages in the Middle East? Getting the hostages back, or simply saying, no way, we're not going to deal with terrorists?
I don't think congresspersons are in a position to make that decision. That seems to be a presidential decision, and I'm not running for that office. I can share an opinion with you, that is, I don't think that we should deal with terrorists such as the people who occupy Northern Ireland. I think that the United States should impose economic sanctions against Great Britain until the British terrorists leave Northern Ireland. I think the President of the United States should be impeached for the assassination attempt on Muammar Gaddafi, which resulted in the killing of many civilians and the killing of his daughter. And I think that those two are closely related, those kinds of state terrorism, because no country in the world would have let us use their air bases to commit that kind of assassination terrorism, state terrorism, except Great Britain, because we support their occupation of British occupied Ireland. And I want to point out the failure of the media here, that in March of 1988, at an IRA funeral, 2 British soldiers were ripped to pieces, and that stayed in the media for 5 days. It wasn't until September of this year, when the British government said it was okay to release that information, although it was available in other journals, that we found out whose funeral they were at. And the funeral they were at were the 3 IRA men who were shot down in Gibraltar, unarmed, by British forces, who made no effort to arrest them and continued to shoot into their bodies after they hit the ground. That you'll find in a mid-September issue of the New York Times. That kind of terrorism that's protected by U.S. journalism and U.S. media has to stop, and it takes some people to try and confront that, both in Congress and here. And one of the bills that I would talk about is the repeal of the treaty that Senator Leahy supported, that would repatriate, in violation of the ex post facto clause of our Constitution.
Thank you, Peter. Now we begin round 2 of tonight's debate. The candidates may ask any other candidate any question they want. 90 seconds for that person receiving the question to respond, and a 60-second rebuttal from the candidate who originally asked the question. We start with... We all have to go for 11 o'clock news? Okay. You have to go? And Karen has to go? John, can you stay here? I can stay. Will and Karen will leave for the 11 o'clock news. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Starting the questioning between the candidates this evening, Mayor Sanders, independent candidate. Anyone you want? Yes.
Can I ask a clarification? My understanding is that if we ask, like you said the name before, if we ask the question of everybody, we get 1 question. If we direct it to an individual, we get 2. Is that still
We'll just go around the table, right? Only because of the time this could take up.
Let me ask my friend Peter a question. Peter, during the last 7 years, President Reagan and the United States Congress have granted approximately $350 billion in tax breaks to the richest 5% of the population. And during that time, we have seen a doubling of the number of billionaires in this country, and the gap between the rich and the poor grow extremely wide. And in addition, we now have a deficit of $176 billion a year and a national debt of $2.8 trillion. We are paying $150 billion a year interest on the national debt. Given the fact that the Congress and the President have given gigantic tax breaks to the richest people in this country, making them even richer, why should we not ask those people to start paying their fair share of taxes?
In the Tax Reform Act of 1985, in fact, we did begin to do that, and whereas maybe 3 years ago there were 50 to 55 corporations earning billions of dollars a year and paying no taxes, now that number has dropped to 16. And in fact, the percentage of taxes paid by the wealthiest people in this country has gone up because of the guaranteed minimum tax. I think we need more of that. We need to keep it reasonable. We also need to make sure, quite frankly, that we bring the 16 major corporations that aren't paying tax into the tax-paying bracket. You cannot go out to the people of this country every year and ask them to pay the same tax let alone a larger tax, which some are willing to suggest, and not bring other people to the table. Where I would differ with you is that I think obviously a lot of water has gone under the dam in the last 8 to 10 years. We're talking about the next 8 to 10 years. I think there are some significant successes that we have pulled off and brought about through the system in the last 3 years, and I would like to continue them.
How much time does one have to rebut? Okay. You point out that we are making progress. I would mention to you that we had, as you indicated, 16 corporations, major corporations like IBM, General Motors, both corporations making over $2 billion a year in profits that didn't pay a nickel in taxes. Furthermore, 20 years ago, under the great radical Richard Nixon, the corporations of the United States were paying twice as much in terms of the total federal budget as they are right now. It seems to me very clear that the basic cause of the outrageous deficit that we have now is tax breaks for the rich, tax breaks for the corporations, and it seems to me that you're not being responsible by asking those people to start really paying their fair share.
I'm nervous about this, but I think we agree.
Are you for raising taxes, then?
We're going to have this ongoing debate.
Sure, why not?
Gentlemen.
It's more interest, you know.
I'd like to address my question to Bernard Sanders, just to keep the action up at this end of the table. You know, we know each other so well. Now I got 25. In the last week, you've said that you would do business with the Democratic Party to the extent that you had to in order to be an effective congressman. I'd like for you, if you would, Bernie, to fill out a little bit what you think that might be, how you would relate to the caucus, and just how you're going to get business done down there if you're elected.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. That's a reasonable question. As you know, there we are in agreement again. As you know, I am an independent, have run for mayor of the city of Burlington 4 times as an independent, and I am running for the United States Congress as an independent, hope to be the first independent that we've ever elected. Now, what a reporter said to me is the reporter said, if you go down there and all you have are 2 political parties, and in order to get on a committee, you need to deal with one of those 2 political parties, which party might you do business with? And my answer was the Democratic Party. Now, in fact, what I also said, which is absolutely true and was reported, is that I intend to work with those Republicans who make sense to me and who are prepared to work with me on specific issues, and there are Republicans. I will work with those Democrats. The Democrats, I think, will be the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, people like John Conyers, Ron Dellums. But essentially, I think the advantage of being an independent is that I don't have to listen to Jim Wright. I don't have to listen to George Bush or Ronald Reagan. I can go down there, speak from my heart, and raise the real issues that the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans are not prepared to raise.
What you haven't done is answered the question. That's exactly what you said to the press last week, and I understand it, and I've heard it before. The question is, when we're talking about getting committee assignments and we're talking about getting from day to day down there, how would you work with the Democratic caucus or the party, and you haven't answered it.
I think I have answered it. I think what I have said is I am an independent, and I think what I have said is that I think, I'm going to say it now, that I'm going to win this election because the people of this state are increasingly frustrated with the Democrats and Republicans in Congress who continue to do a lot of talking and don't do anything. If the reality of life in Congress is that you need to talk to A or B, then I have to talk to A or B, and that's what I'll do.
Okay, as long as it's fair to everybody.
Okay, and Paul, the action's in your part of the table.
My question's to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, I heard one of your radio commercials today in which you have a person speaking and says that you are the only candidate running for Congress who has a record for doing something for the Vermont farmers. Where were you when we passed the premium bill to help farmers this year? Where were you this year when we wrote the tax abatement program to help farmers? Where were you when we wrote the program to bring in real use of land for tax purposes. I was there on every one of those pieces. It's been widely documented that those pieces wouldn't have passed without my support, and your ad says you're the only person that did something for farmers who's running for Congress. How can you justify running that kind of an ad on a radio?
You know where I was, Paul. I was at your alma mater, Norwich University, trying to help them raise, frankly, millions of dollars from alumni and corporations and foundations so that they could continue to upgrade what is a fine education and academic program. That's where I've been for the last year and a half. My ad makes a statement about my commitment to agriculture and the role that I played this summer, quite frankly, and a role that I'm proud of, in helping our farmers organize what was a desperately needed hay lift to farmers in need in Ohio. That's the it's the focus of one of my television ads also, and it's intended, as advertisements are, to convey a commitment and a history of picking up the phone when somebody calls me, hearing what their problem is, getting out there, rolling my sleeve up and trying to do something about it. That's where I was for the last year and a half, and that's what the ad's about.
Mr. Smith, let me say one thing. I give you credit for loading hay, sending it out west, while the Vermont farmers were going through a tough time, and I can tell you they appreciate the $5,000 that we gave them this year. And the point of my question was, your ad is misleading. If we had truth in advertising on political commercials, I think you'd have a hard time explaining that. And I hope that you'll take that ad off the air, because it is an absolute inaccuracy when the people of this state know that I was out front fighting for the farm programs all this past year, and there are other candidates here who have also been speaking out for agriculture.
I guess my response to that is that I hope that somehow as this campaign goes on, you're going to be able to pay attention to a record that you have, which is it's a good record and it's a strong record. But every time so far that something's come out of your mouth that has to do with this campaign, it's been about Peter Smith and what's wrong with him. I'm not going to play that game. I've got my story to tell, and I hope you'll tell your story and stick to the high ground.
Please, Bob. Please hold the applause. Thank you. Thank you. No, we went 4 rounds there, Paul. James Debor, Libertarian candidate, your choice.
This is to Peter Smith. Right now, our entire military budget, about half of it goes for the defense of Japan, Korea, and Western Europe. It was needed to help the Japanese and the Koreans and the Western Europeans in 1950. Do you think it's isolationist to expect those people to move to paying for their own defense over the next dozen years or so?
No, I don't. And I thank you for asking me the question, because I think, in fact, the NATO treaty and the CETO treaty reflected a reality in post-World War II days that doesn't exist any longer. And one of the things that I've looked at hard, as you know, are the ways that we can take money out over the immediate future and the near-term future of the defense budget. And I think there are 3 ways we can do it. I premise that on saying that we are paying too much for a defense that doesn't work. And such people as Barry Goldwater, no dove he, have said, quite frankly, that what we need is to get a better defense at a fair dollar. And I think we can do it. There are 3 ways to do it. One is to reform our purchasing and competitive bidding to make sure that defense contractors have to do it exactly the way the merchants on the main street of Waterbury have to do it. Secondly is burden sharing, as it's called, and quite frankly, what we have to do is either get our allies to help pay the cost of our troops, or in fact do it themselves. And it can be one or the other. There are a lot of reasons why either one might work. And third is, frankly, to begin through the Army bill, and Army in this case doesn't mean armed services, to set up a process that is blind and fair for the closing of military bases in this country and abroad that are no longer effective and efficient. Those are 3 things we can do. I agree with you that we need to burden share, which is the word for what you do.
I disagree. Is this on? Okay. I disagree with you about the idea of burden sharing. That's just making American troops into mercenaries. And I still don't understand clearly from you whether you're in favor of pulling out the 330,000 troops from Europe, which will result in a savings of $25,000 for a family of 4 in the United States in the next dozen years.
I think you do understand my position, and it is that, frankly, I don't think in the short run, anyway, we're going to get those troops out. But the least we can do, step one, is to get our allies to pick up the bills and to build that in incrementally. It makes absolutely no sense for us to send American dollars overseas to pay for national defense of other countries, the money they save in return, and this comes from the South Pacific as well as Europe, the money they save by not having to mount their own defense, they can use to compete with this country, to buy our property, and to take jobs from us. Doesn't make sense, and it's a bad trade.
Morris Earle, Small's Beautiful Party candidate. Your choice, sir.
For Peter Diamondstone, two questions. The Reagan administration says that we can't keep drugs out of the United States. Now, we know that the drugs are destroying us. Under those circumstances, first of all, what's to keep the Russians from disguising themselves as drug pushers, infiltrating the United States in very large numbers and taking over? And the second question is, what's the point of having a Defense Department at all if we can be destroyed in this simple way? Why bother to have all these soldiers?
I consider it to be three questions, and I would do the military budget, I would take down to zero unless we have a declaration of war. The question about people disguising themselves from the Soviet Union, I consider to be a LaRouche kind of question, and I'm not too terribly concerned about that. But the real problem is, what do we do about drugs? And I've started out this campaign with, we should socialize and we should legalize. And I'm talking about both alcohol and cocaine, those narcotics that are both currently lawful and those that are not. And we wouldn't have to deal with Waxman's bill that says we should stop tobacco advertising. Tobacco would be an industry that belongs to us because we just socialized it. And we could change the packaging material, take the flowers off the pack of cigarettes that I smoke. Maybe that would help to let me stop. Let's package alcohol in bottles that all look the same. Different brand names on them, but all look the same. Let's do this, and distribution would go on as currently, but no profit making unless that profit goes to drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Currently, we Vermonters are drug pushers, making $10 million a year from the sale of alcohol, relieving ourselves from the tax burdens that we would otherwise have to the extent of $10 million. I want to stop that. And I want to get pushers off the street, and I want to get pushers. It's not going to be a profitable business anymore. If you want to get your cocaine, you got to get it from a hospital, a physician, or a pharmacy, because we've socialized it, and we've made it, the growing of it, not by slaves in Colombia. We've taken...
Rebuttal, Mr. Earle?
May I give you a second chance to answer the question, Peter? Do you think that drugs are a supply problem, or a demand problem, or part of each?
It's part of each. When the price is high because government makes it a risky business, risk gets high profits. And so it's the price issue that we have to deal with. There's no way to reasonably interdict supply, and we can deal with demand through an educational process, but we've got to bring the price down so that nobody really wants to make profit out of trying to sell small amounts of cocaine, and we don't want to make profit out of tobacco and alcohol. It's both a supply and a demand problem, but it has to do with price.
Peter Diamondstone, Liberty Union Party. Keep the microphone. Your turn.
This question has to do with the format. What do you think of this system of Olympic boxing matches, depriving the voters of the opportunity? I'll say who it's for when I'm ready to say who it's for. Depriving the voters of the opportunity to compare and contrast our points of view as candidates on all the subjects that have been raised, instead of having these little boxing matches going on. I want to know if you would also join in an effort to get ETV to give up this boxing match format. I know it's the Olympic season, but can we get them to give up this format? And if not, why not? The question's for Jim Debor.
I don't hardly dare ask you to ask the question again. Let me say something about this. It's a funny thing when you have a meeting and somebody comes late. People aren't there on time, for example, so what do? You talk to the people who are on time about how awful it is that people are late. Here's a room full of people who have come to hear this debate, and I think all the candidates have been disappointed during this campaign year at the low numbers of people who have come out to see us. And yet we're saying that to those of you who have come out to see us. And this relates to the other part of the problem. In this campaign, I've put out masses of material on exactly what I think on a great many issues. A total of about 50 or 55 issues have been addressed by my campaign, because that's what it's like to be a congressman. You don't just get to vote on 1 or 2 issues. So we've been very careful to put out a great deal of material. I would love to be able to have a head-to-head debate with each of my opponents on every one of these issues, because like the rest of us, I mean, I've put a lot of energy and work into defining my position and figuring out where I stand and what direction the country ought to go in. But the problem is one of time. We have 6 candidates running for this office, and you run into difficulties any way you want to try to imagine it to have us really each of us get our message out, particularly in comparison with one another. So I think we're stuck with a lot of second and third best choices. Part of it has to do with how much you people can stand sitting on the hard chairs and trying to keep your attention span on what it is we're saying. Hour and a half seems to be about what people can tolerate. And I think we all wish it was better. Yeah.
Peter, your rebuttal to that?
It's hard to rebut an answer that wasn't an answer. I'm hoping that you, Jim, and others will join me in an effort to get ETV to change the rules so we don't have boxing matches, so that the community who participates can learn what each of us thinks on a particular subject rather than having these little boxing matches going on. And that's not a rebuttal, that's just a hope. The rules set up by petty bureaucrats in the press, how are we going to buck the rules in Congress?
Or you have 30 seconds.
Rebut that? I mean, my God. I think I'm going to let the room have the time. It's a serious problem to figure out how to get each of us to express our point of view, and I just don't really disagree with it as much as Mr. Diamondstone does, and I think the press does a pretty good job giving an hour format or an hour and a half format to try to have 6 people express their point of view. It's a very difficult problem.
Mayor Sanders, your turn, yes.
I'd like to address my question to Paul Poirier. Paul, I'd like to talk a little bit about the minimum wage. As you know, the purchasing power for the average American worker has declined significantly in the last 15 years under Democratic leadership in the Congress and occasional Republican leadership in the White House. And perhaps the group of people who have suffered the most are the minimum wage workers who have not seen a national minimum wage increase since, I believe, certainly before Reagan came into office. Now, the Republicans are in general in opposition. The Democrats have just collapsed on this issue in the Congress. But you have made reference to the fact that you fought for a minimum wage increase here in the state of Vermont. Paul, the Democratic Party has the governorship, has the Senate, has the House. You helped lead the fight for a 10-cent a year minimum wage increase, which is totally irrelevant because, in fact, the effective minimum wage is far higher than that. Do you really think the fight for a 10-cent a year, an hour minimum wage increase is really an act of courage and struggle for the working people of Vermont?
Bernie, in 1985, when we were fighting to raise the minimum wage, Mr. Smith was lieutenant governor. You talk about a fight. The vote was like, it was tooth and nail. It was bloodied. Every single giant business, the Chamber of Commerce, the Associated Industries of Vermont, all the pro-business groups came out and said, if you raise minimum wage in Vermont, you're going to destroy the Vermont business economy. It took every single ounce to get that raised, 10 cents a year for the next 3 years. I would agree with you 100%. It was deplorable. That's all we could get. When we got it into the Senate, there were people like Representative Alan Avery, who was then the Senate leader, who was killing the bill and sitting on it in his committee. It took all of our persuasion and threatening to hold back legislation to get it out. So I will say to you, Bernie, minimum wage should have been increased more. I would have fought for it. We couldn't get it. We went with what we had. It's a big improvement over the national level. And I'll tell you right now, as you well know, Bernie, that I will be there in Washington fighting to get minimum wage up to the $5 range and not compromising to reduce it.
But, Paul, this is the problem that we have. The Democratic Party, of which you're a part of, and tell us really is the party of the working people, has caved in Washington, and I have to repeat. Now, I have taken on the business establishment in Burlington. They threaten me. They spend huge sums of money trying to defeat me, but we continue the fight in terms of housing, environmental protection, and child care. We stand up to them. What I would suggest, and I think the people of the state of Vermont might perceive, that with a Democratic governor, Democratic Senate, Democratic House, that what you raised was totally irrelevant because the effective minimum wage in this state is probably $4.50 an hour right now. It was nothing. So in a sense that I felt that your criticism of Peter Smith before was probably valid, I would hope that you will not tout your record in fighting for a higher minimum wage because the minimum wage that you won is irrelevant.
And Bernie, I would say you haven't raised it a single penny plus above the $3.35. And the fight is all about we've got to make changes. You talk about being fought by the business community in Burlington. It's no secret. The BizPac 1986 elections put me their #1 target on their list of legislators they didn't want to see back because I have been advocating and promoting a total package that deals with raising wages, protecting the rights of working people. And Bernie, I know it's no surprise that the two labor groups that you tried to get their endorsement from went and endorsed me.
Gentleman, Peter Smith.
Well, having put my first question to Bernie, I'll put my second question to Paul. Paul, when you announced your candidacy last spring in Barrie, you said that you believed a tax increase would be necessary in order to balance the budget. If, and I underscore the word if, it comes to that, what are the taxes that you would be looking for to get how much money?
Peter, what I was asked the question that actually was October 23rd, 1987 when I made that statement. But when I did that, what I said is that the national deficit is a national crisis. We went through Black Monday where we had literally an angina attack, and do we pop a few more nitro pills and the pain goes away, but you haven't cured the problem. What I'm saying is that there are A, B, C, and D, which I have explained throughout my primary campaign that we have to do. More efficiency in government, make sure everybody pays their fair share of taxes. Let's make sure that we eliminate the scandals of defense procurements. And then if it gets down to saying we have to get spending and the deficit under control, would I be afraid as a Vermonter and congressman to say we have got to change? I would not be afraid to do that, as I did it when we had a deficit when I was a state legislator. If I had to raise taxes, I would go after and make them more progressive. I think the income tax changes that were made were totally unfair. They squeezed the middle class even more, and they gave substantial tax cuts to the wealthiest people in this country, and I don't think that's fair.
Simply say that I think the record partially refutes what you said about the income tax reform of 1985, but thank you.
And Peter, my answer is that, you know, the Republican Party has had a hard time justifying what they did to the middle class people. It's the middle class, two-wage earners that have been hit the burden of all of our taxes, and they got hit even harder under the tax reform bill.
Mr. Poirier, keep the microphone. Your turn.
Since Mr. Smith asked Mr. Sanders my question, I'll have to go to my third one. Peter, my question is to you. I hope you were listening to my response on the Middle East. I tried to be very clear on it throughout this last 4 months. My question is to you, what is your position on the Middle East, and in particular on the Palestinian people, and how would you resolve that?
My position on that has been and will be that I think the seeds of a safe future and a future that includes self-determination for the Palestinian people springs out of the Camp David Accords and the negotiating process that has been going on in that region for the last 10, 12 years. It is frustrating, it is difficult, but I think, in fact, what we now see in Israel is a tremendous political debate that will be culminated in the fall elections between two political parties about how to go after the proposals that our Secretary of State Schultz has been putting on the table. I think the goal we do not agree on, but I frankly do not think it is responsible to talk about a Palestinian state now if in fact you understand what it is that's already in place and going on in the Middle East. So I think our goals are the same, but I would play off that tremendous beginning made, frankly, by President Carter with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin 12 years ago, and I would continue to respect the spirit and the tone of that agreement. That's the way to get lasting peace in the Middle East and to get self-determination also.
My answer to that, Peter, I just don't. Do you think that the creation of a Palestinian state is in the best interest of long-lasting peace in the Middle East?
I think I just said yes.
This is to Mayor Sanders. You've called for many kinds of new taxes, much more progressive income taxes, increased inheritance taxes, new taxes on wealth. Please tell us all about these new taxes.
The head boy, you're missing the point. We already have, in the last 7 years, a tremendous distribution of wealth in this country. What has happened is that the poor people have been subsidizing the rich people. So I have the radical thought that maybe it would be fairer for those people who have owned the United States Congress, who have not been paying their fair share of taxes, to start paying their fair share of taxes. Now, the truth of the matter is that I am very proud of the fact that as mayor of the city of Burlington, I have led the statewide effort to break municipalities' dependence on the regressive and unfair property tax. And I have sought and will continue to seek progressive alternatives to the property tax. Should large corporations who make billions of dollars contribute money to educate our kids, or do we go to the elderly people and the middle class who can't afford higher and higher property taxes? Do we ask the 5% of the population that has gotten $350 billion in tax breaks to start paying their fair share, or do we raise regressive sales taxes and other type of user fees, which also hit working people and the middle-income people? It is a fraud to suggest that society does not need money for municipal services, education, environmental protection. The question is, how do you get the money? And let me say very clearly, I believe that the people who have the money, the millionaires, the billionaires, the people who today are not paying their fair share of taxes should be asked to pay their fair share, and let's give a break to the middle class and the working people who are being taxed dry. That's my answer.
You cannot collect that kind of taxes in the way that you're describing. You've described hundreds of billions of dollars in new programs. The government has no money. The only way it can get the money is by taxing, borrowing, or print the money. And even if you totally expropriated the wealth from the 1% that you claim has so much of the wealth, you couldn't have enough money to do the kinds of things you want to do. What you're really talking about is a pervasive system of social welfare such as they have in the Scandinavian countries. Right now, the average American pays taxes from January through May. And what you're talking about is a tax system that would take away the money that the Americans earn all the way from January to August or September. And that's exactly what you're driving at. The rest is deception.
Oh, Mr. Headboy, you didn't hear what I said. We're not talking about the average American. It's the Democrats and Republicans in Congress who've been taxing the average American. What we're talking about is taxing the people who are making at least $250,000 a year or more. The reason that we have a deficit today, and the reason that we're spending $150 billion a year just paying interest on that debt, is that we have given huge tax breaks to the richest people of the country. Now, the reason that we have given the General Electrics and the billionaires tax breaks is because they have tremendous political clout in the Congress. I will fight that political clout, and I will fight for a tax system which is fair. The present tax system is not fair.
Fundamentally wrong.
No, that's... Morris Earle, your turn.
This question is for Mr. Poirier. And then in the debate between Bush and Dukakis the other night, Governor Dukakis stated his position on abortion in under 200 words. Can you state your position on abortion in under 200 words? And if so, what is it?
I have been and always will be pro-choice.
Thank you. Thank you.
I asked this question on August 30th of all the candidates, and had not for Congress, and have not until this morning received any replies. Today I received the reply from the undemocratic Demacan and the undemocratic Independent. The question that I asked was, will each and every one of you agree not to participate in any forum to which the rest of us are not invited, or any of us are not invited? I received no answer until today, when Poirier and Sanders engaged in a debate and decried the fact that the rest of us weren't invited. The question is, again, who will take the oath, who will support that proposition that we will not participate in forums to which we are not all invited? And the question goes to Mr. Smith.
I will agree to that, and I will agree to it. It's not something that I've thought about, and frankly, when I talked to you about it on the town green at one point, we were passing. I think it's a fair question, and unless some extraordinary circumstances occurred, I would agree to have you at the table, sir.
Jim Jeffords has been doing this for 10 years. I don't consider him to be a great libertarian or small d Democrat. Why can't every candidate agree to that proposition? It's been out there since August 30th, 1988.
Let me suggest why every...
Ho!
I'm
sorry.
Taking the pledge.
Time now for closing remarks from our candidates, 2 minutes each. We'll go in the same order again, starting off with Mr. Sanders.
I went first when I started. Any chance of going last this time? Yeah, all right.
Let's flip a coin.
If you're going to stay up all night worrying about it, Mr. Headboy, I'll go first. I don't want you getting... Doesn't matter. Usually that's what happens. We reverse the order. Oh, yeah, okay.
Corporations never pay taxes, no matter how much we tax them. The only issue in corporate taxes is which corporation is getting treated unfairly, and that's always the smaller corporation that's getting treated unfairly, because all corporate taxes are passed on to consumers and employees. All right. I favor a 100% tax, marginal rate on some level of income. I assume that any progressive sitting up here will tell you the same thing. I want to talk about the progressive rate of tax on the only tax that the city of Burlington regulates, and that is the peddler's fee. Now, in Burlington, Jack Kemp says he wants an 11% flat rate. Farmers markets, flea markets do that. But the city of Burlington, no. They have a dollar rate. That is an absolute number of dollars regardless of the income you earn as a peddler. Let's talk about progressivity of taxes. Only Liberty Union, and the platform is back over there, and I have some of our press releases. Only Liberty Union calls for reparations for the 20,000 people who have been killed in Nicaragua as a political party by consensus. Only Liberty Union calls for the blowing off, the discharge of all the Nicaraguan debt that was accrued prior to 1979 by the FDR Somoza government that was a product of the so-called good neighbor policy. Only Liberty Union has said, and that we want to deny tax breaks to religious institutions and private educational institutions that discriminate against women, gays, and lesbians. I wanted to go back to the judicial reform before my time runs out. Fines are unconstitutional. They are the imprisonment of yesterday. Let's talk about progressivity. When you imprison yesterday's work time at $200 a fine, some people are going to be going for 20 hours of yesterday imprisoned.
Wrap it up, one word. Thank you, Peter Diamondstone, Liberty Union candidate. Morris Earle.
Small is Beautiful has positions, small positions in all of the basic needs, economic needs that we have. First of all, food. We support self-sustaining organic agriculture, no pesticides. We support regional agriculture. We support small farms, and de-emphasizing the idea of export of food. In energy and fuel, we support federal grants for solar power development, also wind, thermal, and other alternate sources. We support de-emphasizing coal and gasoline, emphasizing gas and alternatives to gasoline. We support the conservation of energy. In shelter, we want to reduce the building costs by revision of costly building standards, federal and state subsidies, low interest loans, and other measures of that sort. And also we want to close the gap between the lowest price that the builder will charge and the highest that the person who doesn't have a home can afford to pay. And we think the way to do that is primarily by increasing income taxes on the rich and also by Planned Parenthood, so that there aren't as many people who don't have money to buy houses. In clothing, we encourage small factories and craft and home workers, and we support tariffs. We support the law that President Reagan has just vetoed. When we get from those are considered to be the primary needs, and then there are a host of secondary functions such as manufacturing, transportation, communication, finance and law, recreation, and health costs. We have positions in all of those which will alleviate the present situation, and by taking the small path. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'm glad to have been here tonight.
James Hedbor.
In the last 30 years, the federal budget has increased from $77 billion to $1,100 billion. We can't go on like that. In the last 30 years, the national debt, which took 180 years to amass, has increased from $260 billion to a national debt limit of $2,700 billion. It's increased 10 times over, plus. Can't go on like that. In 1958, the federal government borrowed $3 billion. Last year, they borrowed over $200 billion, but they borrowed 40 of it from the Social Security Trust Fund, so they claimed they hit the Gramm-Rudman deficit reduction target. That's a fraud. We can't go on like that. When I listen to my opponents, it depends on who they're speaking to, but they always have wonderful ideas how to spend more money that they pretend the government has. The government doesn't have money. All it has is taxes, borrowing, and printing paper money. They always pretend that the money's going to come from somebody else, not from you in the room. I think we all know better. I have a money-back guarantee which says clearly that I will never vote for a tax increase, I will never vote for an unbalanced budget, and I'll never vote to take away your rights to life, liberty, or property. If I ever broke that guarantee, I'd give back my entire salary as a congressman to the voters of Vermont. I think we're going to have a better United States Congress when we get a Congress, perhaps the only thing Bernard Sanders and I agree on, when we have a Congress which does not have just two big blocks that are controlled from the top down, but instead have a group of 1 or 5 or 10 or 20 independent congressmen and women. Okay.
In closing, I'm glad we got through. I was a bit nervous being the only person on this panel who's never run for statewide office. Many of my opponents here have run numerous times for statewide offices. Glad we got through this evening. I think what's great about running for office in this country is you can go to the people on the streets and you can take your legislative record or your record as a mayor or as an advocate and ask people to judge you by what you've done. And what I'm asking the people of this state to do is take a look at the last 4 years as we as Democrats have controlled the state and say, do you like what we've done for education? Do you like the commitment we've made to the environment? Do you like the commitment we've made to the farmers in the state? Do you like the commitment we've made to the elderly and to the poor? Now, I can tell you, if you're sitting in the audience and you're a Republican, I can tell you're probably saying no. Well, that's fine. But there are many people around the state, as I have learned in the last 3.5 months, who have gone around and saying they like where Vermont stands today. And I'm going to be taking this campaign for the next 6 weeks around the state and proudly campaign as a Democrat that is invested into the future of this state. And I'm proud to go around the state and say that when I become your United States congressperson, and we only have one voice in Washington, and you have to work within the two major parties, I will be there working for the elderly, the poor, the working people, the business community, and doing everything I can to make Vermont a better place to live. That's what this election is about. We're sending one person to Washington to represent us. And we've got to make sure we have a person that has the legislative skills. And those skills are being able to form coalitions, sit down with groups, identify our problems, identify our differences, and work together. Those are not the necessary skills it takes to be a strong executive, but they are the skills you need to be an effective legislator. And I believe that this country is prepared to refocus the priorities and make them education, a commitment to the people, a commitment to our environment, and a commitment around the world that the United States wants to regain world stature. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Peter Smith.
I want to thank the Press Association for hosting this debate tonight. It's been a good one for a lot of reasons, but primarily because I think it's begun to show a difference between Bernie and Paul on one hand and Peter Smith on the other. They're talking about bigger government and I think, quite frankly, the old solutions. And I'm talking about smarter government and better government and, quite frankly, some new solutions. Because that's the way we're going to create opportunity in America. My campaign's about that one thing, creating opportunity. Frankly, I think I know something about creating opportunity. Not talking about it, but going out there and rolling my sleeves up and doing something about it. In 1980, if you didn't get a college education in this state, in 1970 rather, if you didn't get a college education in this state when you were 18, you were out of luck. In those days, the harsh reality was that you faced a life of lower earnings and lower aspirations. When I came back to Vermont after college, I saw that situation and frankly I thought it was wrong. And working with a dedicated and gifted group of men and women, I helped start the Community College of Vermont. And for the better part of a decade, we fought for the funding of that college, the accreditation of that college, and the entry of that college into the Vermont State Colleges system. Today, it's the second largest college in Vermont, serving over 3,000 Vermonters a year, with over 40,000 Vermonters served since its beginning in 1971. That experience, combined with my record in the state Senate and my record as Lieutenant Governor, is, I believe, a record of advocacy and problem solving that creates opportunity for every Vermonter and every American. If we're going to solve the problems that are facing Americans, long-term care, child care, excellence in education, a fair price for our farmers, acid rain, that's the kind of congressman we're going to need. And that's the kind of congressman I'll be. Thanks for having this debate. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to have your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Mayor Sanders.
Close to 8 years ago, something very unusual happened in the state of Vermont. You turned on your radio on Wednesday morning, and lo and behold, the guy who was not supposed to win the race for mayor of Burlington was elected mayor. The first independent mayor in modern American history to take on and defeat the Democratic and Republican parties. And during the last 7 years, you've observed something. You've observed a city where not only a mayor, but a progressive movement is capable of standing up to the people who have the money and have led the state in the fight for alternatives to the regressive and unfair property tax, have led the state in the fight for affordable housing, environmental protection, youth programs for our kids, the rights of women. That's what you've seen in Burlington, Vermont. You've seen a mayor, a progressive independent mayor, named by a conservative national publication, U.S. News and World Report, as one of the best 20 mayors in America. You've seen the city of Burlington receive recognition from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Democrats and Republicans, by and large, as one of the two most livable small cities in America. And you've seen the city of Burlington, the city with a terrible mayor, was going to drive out all of the business and the business community, the people who had the money. We're putting these full-page ads in the paper, vote for the Democrat, vote for the Republican, we're going to lose jobs. That city today now has the lowest unemployment rate in the United States of America. There's a crisis in this country. And the crisis is just not in environmental protection, where our environment is very fragile and in real danger. It's not just in the fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's not just the fact that we're spending $300 billion on the military while we cut down programs in health care or for elderly people or for poor people. The crisis is even deeper than that. The people of America, 50% of the people no longer vote. The people of America are giving up on the political process. They've heard from Ronald Reagan and the Republicans. They don't want to hear anymore. They've heard from the Democrats who have controlled the House of Representatives in Washington for 4 decades. They don't want to hear anymore. They're tired of status quo politicians and mainstream. I believe we're going to win this campaign because the people want a change, a real change, and I'd appreciate your support on November 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, all 6 candidates. Peter Diamondstone, Liberty Union Party, moving from the audience's left to right. Morris Earle, Small Is Beautiful Party. James Hedbor, Libertarian. Paul Poirier, Democratic Party candidate. Mayor Bernard Sanders, Independent candidate. Peter Smith, Republican candidate. Thank you all very much for joining us here this evening, gentlemen from the Associated Press broadcasters. Thank you all very much for attending here this evening. And now, if you want to applaud, go right ahead.